Welcome back to Dr. SuperCoach. On this episode, I'll be discussing the captaincy options for the upcoming round 19, coming right up. Hey guys, it's JB from Dr. SuperCoach again. Now, if this is your first appointment, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It supports us an incredible amount and helps us with these videos weekly. Now, again, this is about the upcoming round 19 captaincy decisions. I should start the video by apologizing for last week. I very nearly did it again where I've hit record and not realized the microphone for some reason has dropped out completely or changed to a different microphone on the computer. So very, very frustrating to record a piece of content and then see that it just doesn't go for anything, so it doesn't end up being uploaded. So last week I did two pieces of content, at least 10 to 20 minutes each, and nothing to show from it. So very frustrating as someone who does this type of work. But luckily I caught it this time. I did about 5 minutes of a video, realized the sound was still not working from last week, which I hadn't double checked, and decided to scrap it and start again. So here we are, take two. You'd think that I'd be more confident on my decisions, but I'm still very, very up in the air about some of these calls. So we're going to start with the Friday night footy. How good was it last week to get the captain and the vice captain out of the way with a good score? Now, if you picked someone from the Western Bulldogs, then you likely had a good score last week. I think anyone from the Bulldogs this week, especially Tim English and Marcus Bontempelli, are going to be your popular captaincy options. Liberatore, I don't mind, but I don't think he has quite. I know he's just come off a big 149, but I have far less faith in his ceiling as opposed to a consistently high ceiling from Bontempelli, and also a high floor. I think 112 is still his lowest since about round 2. So I should have already been logged into this. Sorry, this is my fault. You get to see my team as well, which I don't usually show. Oh, we didn't win a chicken dinner. 6 out of 10, huge. Marcus Bontempelli 131 last week. So 114 in round 16, a couple of 112s there. And that's all the way up to round 3. So nothing sub 112 since round 3. And these days, some people were even opting to take those 112, between 115 and 120 scores. So it really does depend on who you are and what your sort of preferences are. So looking at the average, these are the top two averages in the game. There's no surprise that we're going to these two in terms of who we're looking towards for our captaincy decision this week, vice captaincy decision this week, that is. So I think either of those two, lock them in. Again, I'm going to say this again as I did last week with Errol Goulden. I do think Zach Merritt is a good option here. However, he's just not as good as Bontempelli or Tim English. And I will opt with Tim English over Bontempelli if you do own him. Not quite sure where Draper is in terms of his getting back into the team, but a young ruck against Tim English would be perfect. But even if it's Draper, I think it's a real good opportunity for him to just go crazy. And again, Marvel Stadium, no wind, he'll set himself up perfectly behind the ball there as he does. So I'm very, very happy with either of those two. I think we'll be locking away another early good vice captaincy score with both of those guys as well. So moving on to the Saturday Arvo game, 1:15 Richmond versus Hawthorn. Tim Taranto probably gets looked at in this one. Hawks have done jobs on Josh Kelly, and last week they sent Finn McGuinness to, was it Sheasel? Yeah, sent him to Sheasel after a very strong first 2 quarters. So I can't imagine Tim Taranto in the form that he's in doesn't get any attention whatsoever. So I'm going to avoid that game completely. I know James Sicily's in that game. I don't mind him, but we just saw what happens when he gets tagged. He can get taken down to a lower enough score to make your week very stressful. So I'm going to avoid that game entirely. Carlton versus West Coast. Now, I do like captaining against West Coast, but who the hell would captain from Carlton? The answer is nobody. I mean, Walsh probably gets a good score here, but I'm not trusting it. They might have a run to go with Walsh anyway. Not quite sure how that's all going to play out, but I'm avoiding this one for the first time in a while. I'm going to avoid recommending anyone against the West Coast Eagles. Now, at the Gabba, I don't like captaining returning players from injury, so Dunkley I would find difficult to captain in this one. There's obviously no one really for Geelong. I know that Stewart is in good form, but in terms of a captaincy this week, let me see the 3-round averages. Where does Stewart rank here? He's pretty high up with the 125. Is this their first time against Brisbane this year? That's crazy that round 19 they're versing Brisbane for the first time. So 104 last week. Looked like he was going to have a decent round, but then leading into that, a 147 and a 124. Not huge on it. Not huge on Stewart, but we're going to revisit that. Especially at the Gabba, it makes it a bit difficult. Lockie Neal, I don't mind. I've liked players against the Cats this year, but I think between O'Connor and Blitzarves, they tend to body up the dominant midfielders. Not tag, but just body up. I really like Errol Gordon against Fremantle. Fremantle midfield I've been targeting for weeks as a midfield that leaked points. Alternatively, I really like Brayshaw against Sydney as another team that I target. It's just Sydney tends to do jobs on... I feel like it's like they're overdue to put a Ryan Clark on a Brayshaw. If Ryan Clark isn't playing, then I really do like Brayshaw in this one. Maybe Mills could go to him. Not quite sure how that's all going to play out, but I do like a Brayshaw captaincy. That's an early shout as is probably my favourite captain so far in what we've discussed. Port versus Collingwood. I like Errol as well. So between Errol and, but like maybe a Banfield could run with Errol. I'm not quite sure. This one's tough. It's like they've got the players to do little run with roles, but they don't tend to do so. But I think, this is going to be a bit of a shootout. I think both a shootout in terms of SuperCoach scoring at Optus Stadium. I'm going to give Brayshaw the edge. I think Brayshaw is captain will win that game. Port versus Collingwood. No one really springs to mind here. I know it's at Adelaide Oval. Butters and Rosie likely have okay games, but Collingwood quite restrictive. Could be a second loss in a row for Port, so I'd like to see how they go scoring based on that. So I'm going to avoid that one too. GWS versus Gold Coast. There's no one from GWS I would captain. It's pretty much only Jelly or Cornelio. And I mean, I don't mind a Jelly captain, but he's been showing clearly that he can be tagged all the way down to a 20. And then nobody on the Gold Coast that I'm sitting there looking to captain either. So I'm just making sure I'm not missing anyone obvious. I know Dan Houston's in good form, but I'm not doing that with him. Mentioned Zach Merritt. I didn't mention Ryan, but I'd be surprised if they gave him as much freedom as other teams, and I think Brayshaw's slightly better now. I do like Rory Laird in this one at the MCG. Laird and Dawson I think are fine. Melbourne aren't particularly, they're not taggy, they're not restricty. I think they're you're pretty much okay to go with either one of those guys. I think I prefer Laird. I'm not actually quite sure why that is. Has Laird got the higher 3-round average? Some of these players up here, that's pretty crazy. They're a point separated. Laird had a very good game this week, just gone. I think he's just starting to get back into that, like the 145, 156, 151. Now, I know Dawson can put them together, but yeah, it's just not as promising as Laird. I like Laird as a captaincy option as well here. And then St Kilda versus North. I'm not huge on either of these teams, to be honest. St Kilda generally tend to give up points to defenders, but North don't really. In terms of the midfield battle, I don't think we really own anyone besides Jack Steele, who's obviously not captainable. Jack Sinclair, we have no idea where he's going to line up. And for North Melbourne, I'm not captaining Sheasel. So it really does bring it back to, I think, either Bond or English. I think English is an 11 out of 10. Bond is a 10 out of 10. So 100% we're involving one of those two. If you don't own either of those two, I guess you go Zach Merritt. Doesn't feel as good, but definitely the best one on a Friday. The best one for the first 4 or 5 fixtures, probably. If you don't own either Bulldog, but definitely Bontempelli or English, preferably English. And then when we go down, I think I like Brayshaw, but I think I'll be going Rory Laird if it comes down to it. I don't think it will, but it's going to be a last-minute decision between Brayshaw and Laird for me. So I think Laird, just with that proven 115 plus guy, not going to get tagged, which I think is his biggest or only really thing standing in the way of a good score. I think he's probably the next safest pick for me as a captain, but the captains don't really look amazing. This is definitely the week that a 115 from either Bulldog really makes me go, you know what, I'm probably just going to lock that one in and move on. So I think Laird probably goes next best, or is next safest. Besides that, I do like Brayshaw, I do like Goulden. I don't really know how to separate them besides to go home ground and maybe Fremantle win. But that's a much more difficult prediction than what I'm doing here. But yeah, that's why I kind of just lean towards Bulldog, into Crow, into Laird, and try and keep it as safe as possible. That turned out to be some difficult decision making. I know I waffled on for a little bit there. That's what I tend to do when things get a little bit hot and things become a little bit more difficult to predict than what I would hope. Usually, I would love just a straightforward captain and vice captain every single week, make my job a lot easier. Not always the case. This one does look to be one of those tough weeks. So if I did miss anyone, make sure you do mention them down below in the comment section, or comment at me on Twitter, Slack, wherever it is you can find me. Always happy to have a discussion about someone that I might have omitted or someone that I might have potentially missed in the discussion. Funnily enough, when I posted on Twitter last week, I think I had English is the best captaincy option. If you don't have English, then you go Marcus Bontempelli. Either of those two into Nick Dacos. If you have any other option that you want to talk about and you do own those players, then it's not worth a discussion. Like that, those are the guys. And people still message me like, what about this guy into this guy though? And I'm like, do you own Bontempelli? They're like, yes. And I'm like, go Bontempelli. There's not even a discussion. Whereas this is not that week. I do realise right now that I did not discuss Nick Dacos against Port. I'll be absolutely shocked if he doesn't get attention against us. I know he tried to do it in one of the earlier rounds. I think it was round 2, but that was a very half. It was a very half attempt of trying to do a job on him. I'll be very surprised if he goes in the midfield, Willem Drew doesn't stand on him the entire time, and if he's in defence, someone doesn't hover around him, probably Darcy Byrne-Jones, to do some form of job. So not to say that that's going to stop him from turning up or anything, but it's going to lower his ceiling to a point where I'd much rather just go with Rory Laird. So that's going to do it for the video. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and I'll catch you all next week.